gentlemen, you are looking live at my friend, Guy Powell, who's been on Third Day Live before. Some of you may have watched that episode, but for those of you who didn't, Guy is an author, and he has a really popular YouTube channel. Both of the things, the topics of his book and his YouTube channel are about the Shroud of Turin. And a lot of you know that I'm a Shroudie. I love to talk about the Shroud, and actually have a sculpture that is taken from the Shroud of Turin. But Guy and I have been gotten introduced a few years ago and have really gotten to be close friends. And I'm excited to have him on Third Day Live today because he let me know about something that's brand new that I wanted to let everybody know about, and it gives him an opportunity to talk about it more clearly. And there is a petition related to the Shroud of Turin that Guy has created, and I'm going to give him an opportunity to talk about it. But for the audience, real quickly, what it is, we'll jump right in. The petition is sort of a fact check, if you will, related to a very famous magazine article that came out about the Shroud of Turin carbon dating. A lot of people know that the Shroud of Turin was frankly damaged by 1988 carbon dating test that threw the Shroud into a huge amount of controversy because the results would lead people to believe, and the article certainly that we're talking about led people to believe that the Shroud of Turin was not authentic, that it was a medieval forgery. And for the people who don't know, it's been debunked. A lot of the science behind it has been debunked, and I'm going to let Guy explain the petition, but really what he's trying to do is get them to retract it. So Guy, why don't you go ahead and tell us about it?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. Thank you, and thank you so much for having me on. And you know, we've been talking back and forth for a long time, and you've been on my show, I've been on yours, and one of the things that is for me really a kind of a claw in my skin is this radiocarbon dating. And for all of us that are Shroud and authenticists, which we believe that the Shroud is maybe 99.9% the authentic burial cloth of Jesus Christ, and definitely not a medieval forgery. That claw in our backs is based on some radiocarbon dating, which people kind of think is the Cadillac, the best way to date any kind of an artifact. And in 1988, as Matt mentioned, 1988 in October, the Shroud of Turin was dated using radiocarbon dating, and they came out with a result that said that the Shroud was dated somewhere to 1260 AD to 1390 AD. Now, to Matt, what he said is that that study has now been debunked. Well, immediately after that story, or that dating came out, within 3 months, a magazine called Nature magazine in February 16th, 1989, they basically then published the papers, the scientific papers of the radiocarbon dating that was done. Now, Nature magazine is one of the preeminent magazines, and it's a peer-reviewed magazine. And what that means is that other scientists take the papers that have been submitted, they review those papers, and then they say, yes, all of this stuff makes sense, and therefore it's valid to publish. And so the Nature magazine, organizes that. They had 21, as I recall, 21 scientists review the radiocarbon dating that was done, the process, the paper, the scientific paper that came out of that, and then they published an article on it. And that article was titled "The Radiocarbon Dating of the Shroud of Turin." Makes sense. Well, since that time, that radiocarbon dating and the science behind it and the statistics behind it has absolutely been debunked. And we'll talk about that in a little bit further. And so my petition then is to help us help those people that believe that that article was wrong, was to get Nature magazine to retract, or at least amend it, but retract that article, because it was so well, if it was incorrect, the science was flawed, the statistics were flawed, number one. And then number two, to retract that paper, because it really did damage the science and the other research that had been going on concerning the shroud, and getting it retracted will hopefully lead to, increased more science and get the word out that the shroud is, potentially, with a high likelihood, the actual burial cloth of Jesus Christ. So that's what the petition is all about.
Let me ask you this, sorry to interrupt. Am I right or wrong thinking that there may have been some individual scientists that were involved in that article in some way that have retracted, at least come out and said, hey, there's some problems here? Is that the case or not?
Not that I'm aware of, but that's actually a good question. I'll have to look that up. But I do know in the lead up to the radiocarbon testing, the actual testing itself, there were a handful of different groups involved in it. And then as they got closer, there were a number of scientists that then said, listen, you guys have now changed everything. We no longer agree with the process and the methodology that you're using, and we're not going to be part of it. So in the lead up to it, absolutely. But I'll have to look at that. That's a good point as to whether there's since then been, scientists that said, I want to retract that article specifically on there.
Our good friend Joe Marino, who's written an 800-page book about the subject. I try to keep up with the things that Joe says, because as some people may not know that aren't Shroudies, but he comes out with he's got a mailing list, and that you and I both are on. And so he's absolutely, I would say, the leading scholar in the world, particularly about the carbon dating of the shroud. And I just appreciate everything that he's done for the cause. And you and I try to do our part, and everybody's got their little niche in the shroud community. But one thing that's the most frustrating to me is that it's taken so long for the truth to come out.
Yeah.
Because there have been obviously you and I both have said it in this interview that the carbon dating has been debunked. I wish it had gotten, if it had to come out like it did, I wish that it had been rebutted sooner, much sooner, maybe immediately, because it contributed a couple of decades worth of more stigma to the shroud. And the shroud has always had a stigma associated with it for various reasons. But the carbon dating in particular did an enormous amount of damage to the shroud's reputation, and to the idea that it's authentic. We know that there's a humongous probability that it is the burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth. But there are so many people that don't know that, and the ones that have heard about the carbon dating have been bamboozled by it. In my opinion. So it's exciting to hear that you come up with the petition, and I believe that it could be a very effective way to get them to retract or amend that magazine article, which was so devastating to the shroud.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for those of you listening, the petition you can find if you go to guypowell.com/petition. And on there is then a link to sign up to sign the petition and then get your name involved in the in this process, as we're now, doing everything we can to get Nature magazine to retract it. And to your point, since about 2002, as I recall, there were one of the things that took place during the dating was that the British Museum managed it. And one of the flaws that they did was they did not make the data public. And it's hard to believe that you could have a scientific article peer-reviewed where they didn't make the data public, so that others like me and other scientists and Matt and Joe Marino could actually then look at the data and make sure that it all made sense. And it wasn't until a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act, demand that the British Museum publish their data, that it was finally really determined that the data that they were using was flawed, and that the methodology that they used to analyze that data was flawed. And so then, since that article is written, the dating has been debunked, and now what we're trying to do with this petition is to get that article retracted. So for those of you listening, please go to guypowell.com/petition. And on there, you'll be able to get the link, which is, one of these long links, but you'll be able to hit the button and then sign the petition. And hopefully, as we're gathering signatures, our goal then is to write a more or less a demand letter that references our petition, references the fact that we have, all of these signatures, and then get them to retract, or at a minimum to amend that letter.
Well, it's an exciting idea, and I'm super glad to interview you about it, to help get the word out. And I believe that it will be effective, and I'm excited about it.
Yeah, yeah. One thing too I wanted to mention, there's a couple of things that absolutely went wrong. And Joe's book, which I just showed you here, this 1988 C14 dating, a stunning expose. This book is really kind of the historical record on everything that took place leading up to the testing, and there's so much politics, and instead of people trying to advance the science on the shroud, it was more, I want to advance my name, I want to advance me personally. And so there's personalities, politics, and on a global basis that Joe brings out in there. There's two things, though, that really went wrong, and it's documented in the book, is really the methodology that went into the book. And there's actually a really good video by Michael Kowalski on the BSTS newsletter, British Shroud of Society of the Turin Shroud, BSTS. And he has about 10 points on that video, which I'd like to go through and just kind of talk through them, because it really makes sense as to why, first of all, the methodology was wrong, and then secondly, why this article absolutely needs to be retracted. So, if you want, then I'll just let me just go through that. The original methodology, which was agreed to by the scientists early on in the early 80s, was that there would be 7 labs using 2 different methods to do the radiocarbon testing. And so the idea is when you have a small sample, you want to at least remove any bias or any other problems that might have been in there. So you'd go with, a handful of labs, 7, and then you do multiple techniques, two techniques. And unfortunately, then after all of the politics and all the going back and forth, they only use 3 different labs and only 1 technique. So right there's something that's kind of wrong or moving in the wrong direction. originally there were going to be samples taken from 3 different areas on the cloth. As you can imagine, if you want to get something that's going to be maybe not contaminated or not different, you'd want to take samples from different areas in the cloth. So, for example, if I wanted to radiocarbon date my shirt, I'd take a sample from my sleeve, maybe from my shoulder, maybe from the back or something like that. Well, after everything was said and done, they only took it from one area. And that one area is in a potentially contaminated area. So it wasn't necessarily even one that was a clean area. It was a most likely contaminated area. And it contaminated potentially in 2 different ways. First of all, that was the area that was held by the bishops when they would hold the cloth up and then display it to the public. And then secondly, it certainly looks like that area had been repaired. And so that right there may have been repaired in the 1600s, and that would affect the date. You'd want to make sure that you got a piece of the sample of the cloth that is absolutely going to be clean, no contaminants, but also then from a place where there's reasonable certainty that it hasn't been repaired. So that was the second big thing that went wrong. The labs, normally what you'd want to do is you'd want to do what's called a blind test. Kind of like the drugs nowadays, you have a placebo and then you have a test, and then nobody knows, even the administrator of the test doesn't even know which sample is which. They basically just, take the, they give the test to the test, and then they have a placebo, and then they look at, and see what the impact is. And so you would remove biases. So in the radiocarbon dating, they were actually going to have the sample that was from the shroud, and then they were going to have 2 control samples. So they were going to have 3 different pieces that each of the labs were going to test and come up with, what the dates are on that. And unfortunately, that did not happen. Normally, those samples would have been blinded, so you wouldn't be able to recognize them. Unfortunately, in this case, all of the 3 labs knew exactly which sample was from the shroud and which sample was from the control. So that was, that was a flaw in the methodology. The second thing is, normally if you have 3 labs or 7 labs, you don't want them to talk to each other and say, hey, my results were 1,200. What were your results? You don't want that to go on. You want them to be totally independent, and you want the results then to be analyzed by a separate group that then does that in an independent way, and so that nobody knows and there's no collusion between the labs. It's kind of like, when you're getting at the Oscars, that envelope, it's been certified and what have you by some accounting agency. Well, that's exactly what you'd want to have done here. Well, unfortunately, that was not done. All of the labs were able to talk to each other. They told everybody, well, this is the numbers I got, these are the numbers you got. And so then that not that there was necessarily collusion, but there certainly was a hint of something that shouldn't have been there.
I think that let me quickly let me have a comment there, because most people that would dive into this would automatically assume that what you just described in terms of checks and balances would have been put in place. And really, I'm going to come up with something more strongly worded. I'm going to say the opposite of that was done. I'm not going to say why, but based on what we've seen, is actually the opposite of that. And you alluded to it directly by saying that there was talk and chatter among each other, among the labs, about what they've coming up with. And honestly, to me, that seems like a kind of collusion. And honestly, let me say this: there are a lot of scientists, in particular, that are either agnostic or atheist or whatever you want to. Their worldview is not Christian, and honestly, I believe that a lot of them are strongly biased against the Christian worldview, and would take any opportunity, in some cases, to debunk the Christian worldview.
Yeah,
that's my.
Oh, I agree with that, and it's definitely the case. And but what I would like to have had seen done is you have one lab be, let's say, Christian focused or centered. You have one lab, let's say, maybe be Jewish or Hindu or Muslim, it doesn't matter, and one be atheist. And you give them exactly the same 3 samples, and you say, okay, everybody go off and test them. And it would have been, if you'd have done that, and if the atheist group got a date that was around the 1st century, and the Christian group got a date around the 1st century, and the Hindu or the Jewish group got a date around the 1st century, that would lead enormous credence to the whole process. You know, if you have a really rigorous process, and then you even had biased people as well as, you know, or biased positively and biased negative people doing it, that would have been, you know, even, you know, an even better implication. I like your point.
You know, and one more thing, and this is relatively controversial, but I love the Catholics. There are a tiny minority of Catholic priests who are in, you know, they're called Jesuits. It's called the Society of Jesus. And by the way, a lot of people don't know this, but priests, Catholic priests, all belong to something, kind of a brotherhood or a clique. You could use it as a slang. And the Jesuits are just one of those. But they are the most heavily involved with the Shroud, the Jesuits. The current Pope is a Jesuit. And they guard the Shroud very, very closely. And there's some people that believe that they really didn't want more than one part of the Shroud tested, that they were the reason that only one corner was tested, one that had been patched, one that they were advised not to test because of contamination and because it was patched. It was patched so cleverly that by the naked eye you couldn't necessarily tell, because it was also dyed, the patch was, but clearly, you know, it was a different fabric than the rest of the Shroud. And they only tested one corner of it. And, you know, when I get up and, as you know, and my audience knows because they can see it on my Facebook page, Third Day Live, you can see me talking to a Rotary group. And in particular, you could see me in front of Sonoy, Georgia Rotary. And part of my presentation is to hold up a replica of the Shroud and hold it up just like they did 500 years ago in front of a crowd, and hold it up by the corners. And so people are visual, and what they can see when I do that is exactly how the very corner of the Shroud would have deteriorated and been contaminated. And they could see where it might need to have been patched. And they could see that wouldn't be an ideal place to test. But yet, and they were advised of that by the, you know, by STIRP, by the scientists that, a lot, you know, before the carbon dating had spent, a lot of people don't know about STIRP, but they advised the Jesuits in particular, who really kind of have the most influence over decisions made about the Shroud. They advised them not to test the corner. But that's where the test was done. So there's a term in golf called, I'm not a golfer, but it's called sandbagging. And it's I kind of think that the Shroud carbon dating was sandbagging it, and it's frustrating, and people can't conceptualize that even being a possible thing that happened, but it did. So anyway,
in a big way, yeah, in a big way. And you know, the funny part, and I think it's just so interesting to see how the sandbagging that they did really now comes to light when you have then the rest of the scientific community, or at least the Shroud scientific community, to look at what they did and then to be able to say, yep, there's the sandbagging. So they sandbag the results, just as an aside, which I laugh at this one, is really funny, is there's a certain kind of statistical error. It's called systematic error. And if you take that error based on what they actually measured, if you take that error and linearly draw that and project that error out till you get to the middle of the cloth, it turns out that the middle of the cloth would be dated to sometime in the future. Now, had they done that, and had they published the numbers, and had they done the statistics right, they would have said, OMG, there's something else going on here in what we just did, and our results are, or our conclusions are then wrong. Our dating and our measurements may have been right, but the conclusions are not correct. And if they had done the proper scientific, statistical, whatever it is, analysis, then, and they had seen that, then they should have, published that and said, well, listen, there's something else going on here. We cannot declare it a fraud. We can only say that, have some other kind of a conclusion. That would have been perfect. Then Nature magazine, they could have put out a peer-reviewed article and said, yep, something else going on here, more research needed. Now, the thing that also gets me in terms of the sandbagging, quite often, and nothing against golfers, but usually there's some bets involved and there's some money involved. And, and so that sandbagging in a fun way is there for, just kind of, and there's always then, I want to be the best, and there's the competitive nature that we have. But in this particular case as well, after the scientific announcement was made in October 1988, there were two huge gifts given to the people that were part of the organizing of it. 100,000 pounds was given to one of the scientists from ITV in England, so a company. And then £1 million was given by 45 business folks to one of the main scientists that were involved in this. So here you have that sandbagging, not only leading to biases and incorrect results and what have you, but also monetary value for those people on there. And that's where, that sandbagging for them really paid off. And that's just what kind of gets into my craw, about how badly and how unprofessional the work was that they did.
And nobody really, even Shroud enthusiasts, and that come to the kind of events that we go to, like Father Dalton's event that we were both at Georgia Tech recently. They don't know even that, those financial details, the incentives that some scientists got to honestly be not very thorough, and in some cases maybe even you could say be dishonest. And people shouldn't be shocked by that but they need to know about it. And I just wish that that the truth had come out sooner. But I think this petition, and let's again tell people what they need to do. Again, this would be repetitive about it, is sign the petition, number one. But let's fix it. Let's get this article which was very, very widely talked about
and publicized. Absolutely.
It needs to be amended, or it needs to be they need to just say it. Hey, look, this isn't accurate anymore.
Yeah.
It never was.
Yeah.
Because it was. And now one more thing that I'll say about Father Andrew Dalton, who some people know is one of the top Shroudies out there. He's a Catholic priest, and he's based in Rome, and he teaches Shroud studies in Rome. And he said that something interesting in an interview that I watched on YouTube. He said that the carbon dating was devastating to the Shroud, Yes, it absolutely was. But at the same time, it made the Shroud more famous.
Mhm.
That the negative, it was negative news, and it raised the awareness of the Shroud more than anything could have ever done. I thought that was a very interesting comment.
Yeah, and they say, all news is good news, even if it's negative. To some extent, that's correct, but so many people, as I've been involved, and you, I'm sure as well, but as we've been involved in the Shroud, a lot of people that and you tell them about your book, and you tell them about your statue and some of the cool stuff that that we're both doing, and they say, yeah, but I thought that Shroud was a forgery. What happened? Why are you working on something that's a forgery? And so, even though they do know about it, they still have the impression that the Shroud is a forgery, it's a fraud, it's a fake. And and then you have to go through the whole story. No, no, no. The 1988 carbon dating was fake. They flogged it. They faked it up and flogged it, as what one of the scientists said, and that study has been totally debunked. So,
Oh, I think that the idea of having the petition that you created, and really kind of demanding that the magazine retract,
yeah, yeah. So,
amend, whatever. I think it's a great idea. It really needs to happen badly.
yeah. Well, there's some good news in there. So the petition is at guypowell.com/petition, guypowell.com/petition. There is some good news. So Nature magazine, like anybody, they're a little bit loath to retract an article. I mean, they actually paid 21. Well, they didn't pay them, but they had 21 scientists review the data and the study that the dating was done, and so then they kind of had their vetting of the article. The good news is, though, that just recently there was a scientist that submitted a paper that was totally fraudulent. And he actually got two different articles in Nature magazine. And the good news is that Nature magazine retracted those articles.
That is
And
good.
so what that means now, when we show them because at the end of the day, when we get this petition signed, and we're going to put a whole package together and then write a letter and a demand letter to them, and we're going to reference those two articles and say, listen, you retracted those two articles over there for these three reasons, fraud and bad data and whatever. You then have to retract this 1989 article for exactly the same reasons. And
Yeah.
so then at least then we have a fighting chance now to hopefully get this original 1989 article retracted.
Well, that's exciting. I'm so glad that 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 idea that came to you. I'm sure it was a divine thing,
It was.
and so it's exciting. I'm glad to have you on,
Yeah,
and
thank you.
I want people to certainly my audience, and you've got a much bigger audience than I have. Please act on it. Go to guypowell.com, go to the petition and sign it.
Absolutely, definitely. Matt, thank you so much for having me on. Thank you for allowing me to get up on my soapbox and talk about this. I think it was divine inspiration that said, let's get this thing retracted now. Let's get the petition going. And I've got a whole series of steps that you'll hear about as we move forward. It'll be a handful of weeks yet for the next round. Right now, we're just trying to collect as many signatures as we can. And as we get the news out and the word out on your show and on other shows, I'm hoping that we'll be able to really have the makings of a great case to get that article retracted.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for coming on, Guy.
Matt, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Really, really good to talk to you again.
Great. See you soon. Thanks. Bye.
Yep. Thank you.